I just want to say a word about chartalism, but I forgot what it is, and Paul Davidson named it. So, what is chartalism?
Chartalism. Guys who carry thoughts around.
Yeah. Yeah. How did you come up with that name for it? Is that from NAP or something?
I didn't come up with it.
Now, who came up with it? Did somebody in this room come up with it? Because I sure did.
It's definitely a NAP.
Who came up with the name?
It at least dates back to NAP.
Right, but who started calling this whole thing? It's got to be Paul. The Saudis say they don't set price, and he said he didn't call us chartalists.
Keynes used the money, says all money nowadays is chartalism.
Right.
It's charter money. But it had to be from someone who knew Latin. So,
you know, what this is all about, and I started this a while back with Paul and Randy and whatnot, is that there's certain basic, I'll call them accounting identities, fundamentals, operational realities of our floating exchange rate system, our monetary system, that were being totally overlooked and actually worse. And the whole idea is once you understand these, then different options open up. And one of the options that opened up was this whole employer of last resort. Now, a lot of people have talked about it for a long time, but unless you understand that there's not a government solvency issue, then you can't do it. Okay, and it just becomes a lot of talk. And so I think it was there were people. Bill Mitchell had this idea of a labor buffer stock, which he was developing at the same time, called the BSC, but he didn't have the support on the finance side. It comes down to the same thing: how are you going to pay for it? The same reason why John Kerry couldn't name any programs, because people say, well, how are you going to pay for it? And that implies you have to have higher taxes. And it all comes down to the idea that the government, if you ask any congressman, he knows exactly how it works. The government has to tax or borrow in order to get the money to spend. Right? And if you go down to the train system in New York City and you watch the tokens, you know exactly how it works. First they collect the tokens and then they issue them. No, first it looks like it, but they don't. First they issue them and then they collect them. Anytime it's your own token, you have to get it out there first before you can collect it. If you've got $1 in your pocket, it's because the government spent it and hasn't taxed it yet. And in fact, the government the money to pay taxes comes from government spending. The money they borrow comes from their spending. Anytime the Treasury tries to increase its balances at the Fed or the CB, the central bank has to do repos. In other words, they have to do a reserve add before they can do a reserve drain. Government spends first and then collects. It's completely the opposite of what everybody in policy thinks. And until they start thinking the opposite, things are going to keep going the way they are. And so, I know I heard Pavlina say something. Is Pavlina here? Oh, there you go. ELR is chartalist position. Well, it's an option that opens up once you understand you're collecting and then spending. And then when you say something like, and I'll pick on Pavlina because she's the strongest, but it's a good. These other people talk about whether the Treasury has to borrow in order to spend. Well, legally they do. There's laws that prevent them from spending without having money in the account. They're not allowed to run an overdraft at the Federal Reserve. The Congress they can't spend because they impose debt ceilings on themselves. So there are all these what we call self-imposed constraints on the system. And as long as you have these self-imposed constraints, it's like tying your shoes two laces together and saying you can't walk. Well, sure you can't walk. Untie your shoes and go ahead and walk. All right? And so what we've done is shown that these are self-imposed constraints. They're not inherent in the system. And that, yes, the U.S. government Treasury has to borrow first. It has to finance its spending with taxes or borrowing, but that's a self-imposed constraint. It's not an operational constraint. Okay, and we know it's not an operational constraint, and we go through all these examples. If you pay your taxes in actual cash, they throw the money in the shredder. How does that pay for Social Security? And you go through all these kinds of things. And then let me just throw this out, and I'd appreciate it if anybody has any residual questions about this, about what we're actually saying, what it is, and I think everything, at least that I'm saying, basically is irrefutable. It's not theory, it's just a review of operations, of how things actually operate. Okay, and I don't mean ever, not ever, but in general to go past that. When I do get out of just operational reality into theory, I usually specify it. And I'll say, all right, let's look at one more thing that's operational reality. The currency is a public monopoly. I mean, does anybody disagree with that? Are there any hands up here? That it's not a monopoly? Okay. Now, we all know that from Basil Moore's 1988 book that the reason the Fed sets interest rates is because it has a monopoly of net reserve issuance. And so when it leaves the banks short, in a net borrowed position, the banks then have to come to the central bank to borrow it. The bank says, oh yeah, you can have it. Well, if it's an overdraft, it's going to cost you X. But if you do it through open market operations, it's going to cost you a little less. And if you do it this way, it'll cost you this. And all they do is price the overdraft. And because they're a monopoly, there's no other place to get it. It's a simple case of monopoly. Now, when you have the whole spectrum from monopoly to perfect competition, as you get towards perfect competition, it gets pretty fuzzy. But as you're over monopoly, it's crystal clear. You're a price setter. And there's two prices that a monopolist sets. How this thing exchanges for itself, which I believe Marshall called the own rate. And so with your currency, that's the interest rate, how currency exchanges for itself. And then how it exchanges for everything else. And what you do is you set price and let quantity adjust. You don't have to do that, but it comes down to it. And if the government has 5 public monopolies, the electric, the water, trash pickup, and a couple others, it sets the price and then lets the quantity float. It doesn't say we're going to sell 2 billion kilowatts this year, we're going to let the market decide the price. It don't work that way. If you could, but it would be chaotic, and you need an army of economists to figure out what would happen to price, which is what we do with the currency. We say, oh, we're going to spend $3 trillion this year. Is that what it is? I'm getting lost with the numbers. We're going to have to take some zeros off the US dollar pretty soon to be able to understand it again. And we're going to spend it at market prices, because we don't understand we have a monopoly. We don't understand what price that is. We think we need to get the money through taxes or borrowing in order to spend it. And so it's chaotic what the price level is going to do. We have armies of economists to try and figure this thing out because of the way we're operating our simple monopoly. Now, I know that if I'm a monopolist, I'm price setter. To me, that's a fundamental. Does anybody disagree that if you've got an absolute monopoly on something, you're not price setter? No? Okay. So we know we're price setters. So if we come to some area where somebody's claiming that we're not price setting, that government doesn't have control, that you can have inflation, there's something you can do, then we know there's a mistake in there, because we can back up to saying we know the monopolist is setting price. Right? And so it gets into, well, what about on the lending side? If you have credit creation and it's driving up prices, okay, well, let's back up. We know we're price setter. We know we can set the price level. So let's say I'm setting the price of oil. I'm the Saudis, and I say it's $140 a barrel. It's not going to go to 139 without somebody shutting the lights off at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and stop driving, right? Because I'm the monopolist. I know it's not going to go any higher because I have excess capacity. I'm selling all that they want at $140 a barrel today. And somebody walks up to me and says, I'd like to borrow some oil. It's like, what? Why would I lend you any oil? Okay, you want to borrow some oil. Well, what are you going to give me as collateral would be my first reaction. He says, well, I want to borrow it just unsecured. Just give me oil. Maybe I'll pay it back. Maybe I won't. Well, now if I do that, what's going to happen? I'm going to wind up lending a ton of oil. He's going to be selling it at a discount, and the price is going to go down. Does that mean I'm not price setter as a monopolist? No, it means I was caught sleeping. Okay? Does that happen? Sure. We got caught sleeping with the S&L crisis. We said to the S&Ls, yeah, you can borrow all the money you want, unsecured, uncollateralized, because we have FSLIC insurance, and you go out and raise deposits, and you're getting government money. And we forgot to tell them what they could do with it. So they just did all this stuff, and we had all kinds of, inflation and aggregate demand built up, and shopping centers built in the desert. And then when we figured it out, the whole thing collapsed and came apart. Okay, we weren't, we got caught out. And so, yes, that can happen. Now, was that because the interest rate was zero? No. If I'm lending you oil and I don't charge you, and I charge you 20% interest, but it's uncollateralized and non-recourse, it doesn't matter. You're just going to borrow it and go out and sell it.